The dust settles in lazy spirals around the wooden cross that marks the center of Salvation Creek, a town carved from red earth and desperate hope. The cross stands crooked, weathered by seasons of wind that carry whispers of better days and broken promises. Beneath its shadow, a man in black cloth approaches, his boots making soft impressions in the dirt that will be erased by evening's breeze. He carries a worn leather satchel and moves with the careful grace of someone who has learned to read the world through scars. This is Samuel Cartwright, though the name sits heavy on his tongue like a stone he cannot swallow. The morning sun catches the silver threads in his dark hair, and his hands, calloused from years of holding more than just scripture, adjust the collar that hides the rope burn around his neck. A scar runs from his left temple to his jaw, a reminder of the night he chose redemption over revenge, though the town knows nothing of either choice. The church before him is little more than four walls in a dream, its paint peeling like old skin, its bell silent in the tower that leans slightly eastward as if reaching toward some distant salvation. Inside, dust motes dance in shafts of light that filter through windows clouded with age and neglect. Samuel sets his satchel on the makeshift altar and feels the weight of what he carries. Not just the Bible his fingers have worn smooth, but the Colt 45 wrapped in oilcloth beneath his vestments, a contradiction he cannot yet abandon. The townspeople gather slowly, as they have learned to approach all new things with caution. There is Martha Henley, whose husband died in a mining accident 2 winters past, her face carved with grief that no amount of prayer has softened. She sits in the front pew with her twin boys, their eyes wide with the kind of innocence that Samuel remembers losing somewhere between his first killing and his last. Behind them, old Tom Brennan leans on his walking stick, his rheumy eyes sharp with the suspicion that comes from outliving trust. Samuel's voice, when he speaks, carries the weight of desert winds and distant thunder. "We are all of us wanderers," he begins, his words settling into the church's corners like seeds finding soil. "Some wander in body, some in spirit, and some—" He pauses, his gaze finding the cracked window where shadows play across the glass. "Some wander in both, carrying the burden of who they were and the hope of who they might become." The sermon unfolds like a map of broken territory, each word chosen with the precision of a man who has learned that language, like gunpowder, can heal or destroy, depending on how it's used. He speaks of Moses fleeing Egypt, of David hiding in caves, of men who carried the weight of their past into an uncertain future. The congregation listens with the hunger of people who have been too long without hope, their faces softening as his words weave through the church like morning light through autumn leaves. But outside, the wind carries more than dust. It carries the sound of approaching horses, the jingle of spurs, the whispered name that Samuel has tried to bury: Jack Malone. The most wanted man in 3 territories, they say, responsible for the deaths of 7 men and the theft of gold that could have built a dozen towns like Salvation Creek. The bounty on his head has grown like a tumor, fed by fear and the promise of justice that money cannot buy. Samuel's hands remain steady as he closes the Bible, though his heart beats with the rhythm of hoofbeats that grow closer with each passing moment. He has known this day would come, has felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. The question is not whether his past will find him, but whether the man he has become can survive the collision with the man he was. Sheriff Wade Coleman enters the church as the congregation files out, his badge catching the light like a warning. He is a good man, Samuel has learned, the kind who believes in justice tempered with mercy, but his eyes hold the weight of responsibility for a town that has seen too much violence. "Fine sermon, preacher," he says, his voice carrying undertones that speak of sleepless nights and hard choices. "Folks seem to be taking to you." Samuel nods, his fingers unconsciously moving to the scar on his temple. "They're good people, Sheriff. They deserve better than what they've had." "That they do." Coleman moves closer, his boots echoing in the empty church. "Which is why I need to ask you something that might sound strange." He pauses, studying Samuel's face with the careful attention of a man who has learned to read truth in the spaces between words. "We've had word that Jack Malone might be heading this way. Dangerous man, wanted for murder and robbery. You haven't seen anyone matching his description, have you?" The irony sits between them like a loaded gun. Samuel meets the sheriff's gaze steadily. knowing that the truth would shatter more than just his own carefully constructed life. I'll keep my eyes open, Sheriff. A man like that, he lets the sentence hang, incomplete and heavy with implication. After Coleman leaves, Samuel stands alone in the church, the silence pressing around him like the walls of a tomb. He thinks of the men he killed, not in anger but in the cold necessity of survival. He thinks of the gold he stole, not from greed but from the desperate hunger of a man who had nothing left to lose. He thinks of the night he buried Jack Malone in an unmarked grave beside a creek whose name he never learned, and how Samuel Cartwright rose from that grave, like a resurrection born of will rather than divine intervention. The afternoon brings visitors to his small cabin behind the church. Martha Henley arrives with a basket of bread and jam, her presence filling the cramped space with the scent of yeast and sorrow. "The boys wanted to thank you," she says, her voice soft as worn velvet. "They haven't slept through the night since their father passed. Your words today, they gave them something to hold on to." Samuel accepts the bread with hands that have held death and now cradle hope. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," he says, remembering his own childhood. The way violence had carved away his innocence like a knife paring an apple. They know when someone speaks truth, even when that truth is wrapped in layers of necessary fiction. She studies his face with the intensity of a woman who has learned to read the signs of hidden pain. "You've lost someone too, haven't you?" she asks. "I can see it in your eyes, the way you look at my boys. Like you understand what it means to have something precious taken away." The question hangs between them like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel could lie, could maintain the careful distance that has kept him safe, but something in her voice, in the way she holds herself like a woman balancing on the edge of a cliff, compels honesty. "I lost myself once," he says finally. "Took years to find my way back. Some days I'm still looking." That evening, as the sun bleeds red across the western sky, Samuel sits on his porch cleaning his gun. The ritual is meditative, his hands moving with the practiced precision of a man who has learned that survival depends on preparation. Each piece of metal gleams in the fading light, and he remembers the weight of the weapon in his hand, the way it had felt like an extension of his will. The sound of approaching riders cuts through the evening air like a blade through silk. Samuel's hands still, and he feels the familiar tightening in his chest that comes before violence. 3 men on horseback materialize from the dust, their faces hard with the kind of purpose that leaves no room for mercy. He recognizes the leader immediately, Dutch Garner, a bounty hunter whose reputation for brutality preceded him across the territories like a shadow. "Evening, preacher," Dutch calls out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake before it strikes. "Mind if we water our horses? It's been a long ride." Samuel stands slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Of course." There's a trough behind the church. He knows this is not about water, knows that Dutch has come hunting, following a trail that should have gone cold years ago. The bounty hunter dismounts with the fluid grace of a predator, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. "You know, preacher, you remind me of someone. Can't quite place it, but there's something familiar about you." He moves closer, his hand resting casually on his gun. "You ever been to Tombstone? Silver Creek? Places where a man might have made a name for himself?" "I've traveled many places," Samuel replies, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "In my experience, the past is best left buried." Dutch laughs, a sound like breaking glass. "Funny thing about the past, preacher, it has a way of digging itself up, especially when there's money involved." He produces a wanted poster from his coat, the image faded but unmistakable. "Jack Malone, 7 murders, 15,000 in gold. Ring any bells?" Samuel looks at the poster, at the face that was once his own, and feels the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders, like a shroud. "I'm afraid I can't help you, gentlemen. Perhaps you should speak with Sheriff Coleman." "Oh, we will," Dutch says, his smile sharp as a blade. "But first, I'd like to have a little chat with you. See, I've been tracking Jack Malone for 3 years, and every trail leads to a dead end. Man just disappeared, like he never existed. But then I hear about a new preacher in a backwater town, a man with no past and convenient scars, and I start to wonder." The moment stretches between them like a rope about to snap. Samuel knows he has a choice to make. the same choice he has been making every day since he buried Jack Malone beside that nameless creek. He can run, can shed this life like a snake sheds its skin and disappear into the vast emptiness of the territory. Or he can stand, can fight for the man he has become and the people who have learned to trust him. The decision comes not as a thought but as a feeling, a certainty that settles into his bones like winter cold. He will not run, not from Dutch Garner, not from his past, not from the truth that has been building in his chest like a storm seeking release. "You're right," he says, his voice carrying across the evening air like a bell tolling. "I am Jack Malone, or I was. The man you're looking for died 3 years ago beside a creek I couldn't name if my life depended on it." Dutch's hand moves to his gun, but Samuel is faster, his weapon appearing in his hand with the fluid grace of a man who has never forgotten how to kill. "But I'm not that man anymore," he continues, his voice steady despite the trembling in his chest. "I'm Samuel Cartwright, and I have a congregation that depends on me. People who have learned to hope again because I gave them something to believe in." The church bell begins to toll, its sound carrying across the town like a warning. Samuel realizes that someone must have seen the confrontation, must have pulled the rope that summons the faithful to prayer and the sheriff to action. The sound gives him strength, reminds him that he is no longer alone in the world. "The money's still out there," Dutch says, his gun now drawn but not yet aimed. 15,000 in gold doesn't just disappear." "No," Samuel agrees, "it doesn't. It builds churches. It feeds widows and orphans. It becomes something more than what it was." He moves slightly, positioning himself between Dutch and the church where his congregation might be gathering. "I gave it all away, every coin. Tried to balance the scales, tried to make amends for what I had done." Dutch's laugh is bitter as desert wind. "You think giving away stolen money makes you a saint? You think putting on a collar washes the blood from your hands?" "No," Samuel says, his voice heavy with the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I think a man becomes who he chooses to be, every day, with every choice. I chose to become someone who builds instead of destroys, who protects instead of prays." The sound of approaching footsteps cuts through the tension like a blade. Sheriff Coleman appears from the gathering dusk, his weapon drawn but not aimed, his face set with the kind of determination that comes from a man who has sworn to protect his town regardless of the cost. "Gentlemen," Coleman says, his voice carrying the authority of law and the weight of responsibility, "I suggest you lower your weapons and step away from each other." Dutch's eyes flick between Samuel and the sheriff, calculating odds and weighing options. "This man is Jack Malone, Sheriff. There's a bounty on his head, and I aim to collect it." Coleman's gaze moves to Samuel, and in his eyes, Samuel sees not surprise, but a kind of sad recognition. "I know who he is," the sheriff says quietly. "Have known for months. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" The admission hangs in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel feels the weight of the moment, the convergence of past and present that will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone he has learned to care about. "He's a wanted man," Dutch insists, his voice rising with frustration. "The law is the law." "The law," Coleman says, his voice measured and deliberate, "is supposed to serve justice. And sometimes justice looks different than we expect." He moves closer, his weapon still drawn but pointed at the ground. "I've watched this man for months, seen him comfort the grieving, feed the hungry, give hope to people who had lost all reason to hope. If that's not justice, if that's not redemption, then I don't know what is." Dutch's face darkens with anger. "You can't just ignore a bounty, Sheriff. There are rules, procedures. He's a killer." "Was," Samuel corrects, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who has faced his demons and found them wanting. "I was a killer. I was a thief. I was a man who had lost everything and decided to take from others what I couldn't find in myself." He pauses, his gaze moving from Dutch to Coleman to the church where lamplight now glows in the windows. "But I'm not that man anymore. I haven't been for 3 years." The sound of singing drifts from the church, voices raised in harmony that speaks of faith and community, and the kind of hope that can only be born from shared struggle. Samuel recognizes the hymn, remembers teaching it to Martha Henley's boys, remembers the way their faces had lit up when they finally mastered the melody. Listen to that, he says, his voice soft with wonder. 3 years ago, this town was dying. People were leaving, giving up, letting despair win. Now they sing, they hope, they believe in tomorrow. He meets Dutch's gaze steadily. If you take me, if you destroy what we've built here, what does that serve? What kind of justice is that? Dutch's hand wavers on his gun, and Samuel sees the moment of doubt, the crack in the armor of certainty that has driven the bounty hunter across half the territory. The money, Dutch says, but his voice lacks conviction. The people who died. The money is gone, given to those who needed it more than I did, Samuel replies. And the people who died, I carry them with me every day. Their faces, their names, the weight of what I took from the world. That's my burden, my penance. But it's also my motivation to be better, to give back more than I took. The sheriff moves closer, his presence solid and reassuring. I've been doing this job for 20 years, he says, his voice carrying the weight of experience. I've seen men who kill for pleasure, who take because they can, who destroy because destruction is easier than creation. That's not this man. Whatever he was, whatever he did, the man standing here now is someone worth protecting. The moment stretches between them like a rope about to snap. Samuel can feel the weight of decision hanging in the air, the choice that will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone he has learned to love in this small town carved from red earth and desperate hope. Dutch's gun wavers, and Samuel sees the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between duty and conscience, between the law as written and justice as lived. 3 years, Dutch says finally, his voice heavy with something that might be respect. 3 years of good deeds don't erase 7 murders. No, Samuel agrees, they don't. But they might mean something. They might be worth something. They might be the beginning of a different kind of justice. The sound of footsteps announces the arrival of more townspeople, drawn by the church bell and the tension that crackles in the evening air like electricity before a storm. Martha Henley appears first, her boys flanking her like protective shadows. Behind them come Tom Brennan and a dozen others, faces set with the kind of determination that comes from people who have found something worth defending. What's happening here? Martha asks, her voice carrying the strength of a woman who has faced loss and found the courage to hope again. Dutch looks around at the gathering crowd, at the faces that reflect not fear, but resolve, not judgment, but protection. This man, he says, his voice uncertain now. This man is Jack Malone. He's wanted for murder. This man, Martha replies, her voice steady as stone, is Samuel Cartwright. He's our preacher, our friend, our family. He's the man who held my hand when I wanted to give up, who taught my boys to believe in tomorrow, who showed us that redemption is possible even in the darkest places. The crowd murmurs agreement, voices rising in a harmony that speaks of shared conviction. Samuel feels the weight of their support, the strength of community that he has helped build and that now rises to protect him. I appreciate your loyalty, Dutch says, his gun now lowered but not holstered. But the law is the law. There's a bounty on his head, and I have a job to do. The law, says a new voice, and Samuel turns to see Judge Harrison approaching through the crowd. The old man moves slowly, his cane tapping against the hard-packed earth, but his presence carries the weight of authority and wisdom earned through decades of service. The law is more than bounties and wanted posters, Mr. Garner. It's about justice, about making things right. Dutch's face shows surprise at the judge's presence, but he straightens with the respect due to judicial authority. Your Honor, this man is wanted for multiple murders. The evidence is clear. The evidence of what he was is clear, Judge Harrison agrees, his voice carrying the measured cadence of careful thought. But what about the evidence of what he has become? What about the testimony of these people, the lives he has touched, the good he has done? The judge moves closer to Samuel, his eyes reflecting the kind of understanding that comes from a lifetime of weighing justice against mercy. I've been watching you, son, he says quietly. For months now, I've been watching and waiting, trying to understand how a man changes so completely that he becomes someone else entirely. Samuel meets the judge's gaze steadily, knowing that this moment will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone who has learned to depend on him. I don't know if I can explain it, Your Honor. I only know that one day I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't want to be, and I decided to become someone else. That's not how it works, Dutch interrupts, his voice rising with frustration. You can't just decide to stop being a killer. You can't just put on a collar and call yourself redeemed. Can't you? Judge Harrison asks, his voice carrying the weight of legal precedent in human understanding. In my experience, Mr. Garner, the law serves justice best when it recognizes that people can change, that redemption is possible even for those who have fallen the furthest. The crowd presses closer, not threatening but protective, their presence a testament to the man Samuel has become. He sees faces he recognizes, people he has comforted in their grief, couples he has married, children he has taught to read. Each face tells a story of transformation, of a community that has learned to hope again because one man chose to become something better than what he was. I won't lie to you, Samuel says, his voice carrying across the gathering like a bell tolling. I am Jack Malone. I killed 7 men, stole 15,000 in gold, and lived as an outlaw for 5 years. But I'm also Samuel Cartwright, and I have spent the last 3 years trying to give back more than I took, trying to build instead of destroy, trying to become worthy of the trust these people have placed in me. Dutch's hand moves to his gun again, but the motion is hesitant, uncertain. You're still a wanted man? The bounty is still valid. The bounty, Judge Harrison says, his voice carrying the authority of law and the wisdom of experience, is a reward for bringing a dangerous criminal to justice. But what if that criminal no longer exists? What if the man who committed those crimes has been replaced by someone who serves justice in a different way? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Samuel feels the weight of the moment, the convergence of past and present that will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone he has learned to love in this small town, carved from red earth and desperate hope. I have a proposal, the judge continues, his voice measured and deliberate. Samuel Cartwright will surrender himself to the law. He will face trial for the crimes of Jack Malone. But he will be tried not just on the evidence of what he did, but on the testimony of what he has become. Dutch's eyes narrow with suspicion. You're talking about a fix, Judge. You're talking about letting a killer walk free. I'm talking about justice, Harrison replies, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent balancing law and mercy. I'm talking about a trial that considers not just the crimes committed, but the redemption earned. I'm talking about a legal system that recognizes that people can change, that the man who stands before us now is not the same man who committed those crimes 3 years ago. Samuel feels the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders like a shroud. He could run, could disappear into the vast emptiness of the territory and start over again somewhere else. But he knows that running would destroy everything he has built, would betray the trust of the people who have learned to depend on him. I accept, he says, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who has faced his demons and found them wanting. I'll face trial. I'll let the law decide whether Samuel Cartwright has earned the right to live, whether the good he has done outweighs the evil that Jack Malone committed. The crowd murmurs approval, voices rising in harmony that speaks of shared conviction and hope. Martha Henley steps forward, her hand reaching out to touch Samuel's arm. We'll stand with you, she says, her voice carrying the strength of a woman who has learned to hope again. All of us will testify to who you are, to what you've become, to the man who saved our town and our souls. Dutch looks around at the gathered faces, at the determination that reflects not fear but resolve, not judgment but protection. His gun remains in his hand, but his purpose seems to waver like a flame in the wind. You're making a mistake, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. Justice isn't about what a man becomes. It's about what he's done. Justice, Samuel says, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, is about making things right. And sometimes making things right means allowing people to change, to grow, to become better than what they were. The bounty hunter's hand tightens on his weapon, and Samuel sees the moment of decision approaching like a storm on the horizon. He knows that Dutch could fire, could end this confrontation with violence and claim his bounty. But he also knows that such an act would destroy more than just one man's life. It would shatter the hope of an entire community. Put the gun down, Dutch, Sheriff Coleman says, his voice carrying the authority of law and the weight of responsibility. This isn't the way. This isn't justice. Dutch's eyes flick between Samuel and the sheriff, calculating odds and weighing options. He's a killer, he says, but the words sound hollow now, emptied of conviction. He was a killer, Coleman corrects. Now he's a preacher, a friend, a man who has given this town something to believe in. That has to count for something. The moment stretches between them like a rope about to snap. Samuel can feel the weight of decision hanging in the air, the choice that will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone he has learned to love in this small town carved from red earth and desperate hope. Finally, Dutch lowers his weapon, his shoulders sagging with the weight of defeat. 3 years, he says, his voice heavy with something that might be respect. 3 years of good deeds. Maybe that's worth something after all. The crowd releases a collective breath, the tension flowing out of the gathering like water from a broken dam. Samuel feels the weight of the moment, the realization that he has been given a chance, not to escape justice, but to face it on his own terms. Thank you, he says, his voice carrying the weight of gratitude and the promise of continued service. All of you, for believing in me, for standing with me, for showing me that redemption is possible even for those who have fallen the furthest. As the crowd begins to disperse, returning to their homes and their lives, Samuel stands in the gathering darkness and feels the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. He will face trial, will answer for the crimes of Jack Malone, but he will do so as Samuel Cartwright, as a man who has learned that justice is not just about punishment, but about transformation. Not just about paying for the past, but about building something better for the future. The church bell tolls once more, its sound carrying across the town like a promise of dawn. Samuel looks up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky and feels the weight of hope, the certainty that tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to serve, to build, to become worthy of the trust that has been placed in him. In the distance, a coyote calls to the night, its voice carrying across the desert like a prayer for redemption. Samuel listens to the sound and knows that he has found his way home, not to a place but to a purpose, not to safety but to the kind of justice that transforms rather than destroys, that builds up rather than tears down, that offers hope even in the darkest places. The wind picks up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain, and Samuel Cartwright, who was once Jack Malone but is now something entirely different, walks toward the church where lamplight glows in the windows, and the sound of singing drifts on the evening air like a hymn of redemption, sung by voices that have learned to hope again. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.